I never thought moving into my own lake cabin would cause such a stir. But the second I pulled into the driveway, the drama basically wrote itself. It started with a glare from across the road, arms folded, phone in hand, and that unmistakable HOA attitude. She didn't even wait for me to unload a single box before storming over, demanding to know who I was and what I was doing, trespassing on private property. I calmly told her it was my cabin, that I owned the place fair and square. But that only made things worse. She went full-on HOA Karen, mode lecturing me about community standards and how newcomers need to go through proper channels. I tried to stay polite, but the situation got ridiculous fast. Within minutes, she was on the phone with 911, now, telling the dispatcher there was a suspicious man invading a home by the lake. I stood there in disbelief, thinking, does she really not know who she's talking to? What she didn't realize was that not only do I legally own the lake cabin, I also happen to own the entire HOA complex she lives in. Every building, every sidewalk, every inch of that neighborhood falls under my company's portfolio. She was calling the cops on the guy who signs off on her HOA budget. I didn't say a word at first. I wanted to see how far she'd take it, how bold she'd get before realizing just how wrong she was. And trust me, she didn't hold back. The threats, the shouting, even trying to block my car with her golf cart all just kept escalating. But what happened next? Let's just say, the moment the truth finally came out, everything changed. A few minutes after she called 911, I heard the sirens echoing through the trees. I stayed calm, leaning against my truck, arms crossed, just watching her pace up and down like she was some kind of neighborhood sheriff. She kept shouting into her phone, tossing in words like trespassing, unauthorized occupant, and even potential threat. I almost laughed at the irony, but I kept my mouth shut. I wanted the officers to hear everything from her first. The property had been in my family for years, but I recently bought out the entire HOA development as part of a broader investment plan. Most of the residents didn't know yet. I had planned to visit the community quietly, get a feel for things before making any big announcements. But Karen's welcome committee clearly had other plans. From what I gathered listening to her rant, she considered herself the eyes and ears of the neighborhood, basically treating every driveway and mailbox like her own personal turf. The funny part is, I'd actually heard about her before from the HOA board meetings my company reviewed. She'd filed more complaints in a year than the rest of the complex combined. Lawn height, Christmas lights, barking dogs, you name it. They even had a folder labeled Karen Incidents. I always thought it was exaggerated. Turns out, it wasn't. As I stood there waiting for the officers to arrive, a few other neighbors peeked out from behind curtains or stood awkwardly by their porches. Some looked curious, others like they didn't want to get involved. One older guy gave me a knowing nod, like he'd seen this routine before. Karen didn't notice. She was too busy waving her clipboard around and pointing at my truck like it was evidence in a crime scene. And then the squad car pulled in, Two officers stepped out of the car, one older, steady, clearly experienced, and the other, younger, probably still new to the job. Karen rushed over like she'd just spotted her backup arriving for a high-stakes takedown. She pointed furiously in my direction, going off about how I was breaking into someone else's vacation home and how she knew every homeowner in this neighborhood. Her voice carried across the lot, loud and frantic, like she was trying to control the whole scene. The older officer walked over to me calmly. I greeted him with a nod and handed over my ID before he even asked. I also pulled out a folder from my truck's glove box, had my property deed, purchase documents, and business credentials. He skimmed them over while his partner took Karen aside to calm her down. From a distance, I could still hear her insisting I was probably using fake paperwork and one of those squatters from out of state. That's when I realized this wasn't just about rules. It was about control. While the officer reviewed my paperwork, I noticed another neighbor stepping onto their porch. A woman in her 50s, wearing gardening gloves, watching the scene play out like it was a neighborhood drama she'd seen before. She didn't say a word, but her eyes met mine briefly, and there was a flicker of sympathy in her face, like she already knew what kind of mess I was walking into. Karen's voice kept rising. She was now blaming me for disturbing the peace and refusing to register with the HOA office, which, ironically, was managed by a team I had already fired weeks ago during a quiet restructuring. I hadn't announced the change publicly yet, which only added more fuel to her fire. She thought she was still in charge. She thought she had the power. But the officer looked up from the paperwork, gave me a long, thoughtful glance, and said, "This is interesting." The officer flipped through the last page of the documents slowly, then looked back at me with a raised brow. "So you're the owner?" he asked. I nodded and calmly said, "Of the Cabanond, the entire HOA complex." He didn't respond right away. She gave a quick glance toward his partner, who was still trying to keep Karen from completely spiraling. Her voice echoed across the lot, now accusing me of impersonating a property owner and demanding they call for backup. I could see the younger officer starting to lose patience. Karen wasn't letting him get a word in. She was pacing in circles, jabbing her finger in the air, demanding answers and shouting about community security. She still hadn't even asked my name. She was too blinded by her need to control everything around her. The tension was building like a pot, about to boil over. A few more neighbors had stepped out by then, one recording with his phone, another whispering to someone next door. I caught bits of their conversation. Apparently, this wasn't the first time she had made a scene like this, but it was the first time police were actually called. The whole neighborhood was watching, wondering what was really going on and how far this would go. Karen stormed over again, this time holding a printed copy of the HOA rules, like it was some kind of law book. According to page 5, she shouted, "Unauthorized occupancy is a clear violation subject to fines and even eviction." The officer held up his hand and calmly asked her to step back, but she wasn't having it. She kept going, louder and more dramatic by the second. The older officer finally took a step toward her and said, "Ma'am, before we proceed any further, there's something you really need to see." He held up my documents and gave her a look that said everything was about to shift. And in that frozen moment, you could feel the air change. Karen stopped mid-sentence. The whole neighborhood went silent. Karen stood frozen, her mouth slightly open as the officer held up my documents. For the first time since this whole circus began, she didn't have a comeback. She snatched the paperwork out of his hand like she could somehow disprove it just by looking hard enough. Her eyes darted across the pages, and her lips started moving silently as she read. Then her face changed. Not just confusions, something closer to panic. But still, she wasn't ready to back down. "That can't be right," she snapped, waving the papers. "No one informed the HOA board. We would have known. There are procedures, signatures, meetings." She looked around as if searching for someone to back her up, but most of the neighbors had gone quiet, glued to the scene like they were watching a live courtroom drama. And just when I thought it was finally settling down, a sleek black SUV pulled up at the edge of the lot. A well-dressed woman stepped out, clipboard in one hand, tablet in the other. It was Vanessa, my company's legal officer. I hadn't asked her to come, but apparently word had spread faster than I expected. She gave me a small nod, then walked straight over to the officers and introduced herself with a calm confidence that made Karen visibly nervous. "Sorry for the interruption," Vanessa said, "but I'm here to confirm ownership and address a more urgent issue. We just uncovered financial discrepancies tied to the current HOA administration." She didn't look at Karen directly, but everyone else did. Karen took a step back. "Excuse me," she said, her voice shaking now. "What are you implying?" Vanessa handed over a folder to the officer. Several HOA board members, including Ms. Karen here, have been under internal review for misusing community funds. Expenditures, falsified maintenance requests, even pocketing fines from homeowners. The officer raised his eyebrows. Karen went pale. The neighbors started whispering louder now, and I didn't have to say a word. The real story was unraveling, right in front of everyone. And it was far from over. Karen's face flushed red as Vanessa's words sank in. She tried to speak, but all that came out was a stutter. The older officer flipped through the folder Vanessa handed over, scanning printed statements, flagged emails, and photos of receipts. The silence from the neighbors was deafening. Now one was even pretending to look away. This wasn't just about a mistaken 911 call anymore. This was something much bigger, and Karen knew it. I was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe, she finally blurted out. We've had break-ins before. I didn't know who he was. You can't blame me for doing my job. Her voice cracked, and for the first time, she looked small. No clipboard to hide behind. No HOA rulebook to wave around. The officer took a deep breath and said, "Ma'am, we'll need you to come with us and answer some questions downtown. These documents present serious concerns." Karen looked around again, but this time there were no allies, just neighbors shaking their heads. She hesitated for a second, then slowly walked toward the patrol car. No cuffs, no dramatic arrest, just a quiet, bitter walk of shame as she sat inside the squad car. The younger officer turned to me and said, "You handled that better than most would've." I just nodded, watching the door close behind her. It felt like a long overdue reset for the entire community. People began stepping out of their homes more freely, thanking me, some even apologizing for not stepping in sooner. Vanessa stayed a few minutes longer, explaining that a new HOA management team would be introduced and that everyone would be notified formally. Just as I was getting ready to head inside my cabin for the first peaceful moment all day, an older man from 2 houses down approached me. He smiled, then said, "You know, she wasn't the only one pocketing money. You might want to check who signed off on her reports." That's when I realized Karen was just the beginning. The neighbor's words stuck with me long after the patrol car pulled away. Over the next few days, I had my team dig deeper into the HOA's finances. What we found was even worse than expected. Karen had indeed signed off on several questionable expenses, but she wasn't acting alone. 2 other board members were quietly approving the same payments and even created fake invoices for repairs that were never done. They'd been treating the HOA like their personal ATM for years, and no one had dared to challenge them until now. Once we had enough evidence, we held a community meeting on the lakefront. For the first time, homeowners felt like their voices mattered. People came forward, sharing stories of being fined unfairly or ignored when real problems needed attention. We laid out the new planned transparent budgeting, fair leadership elections, and proper use of HOA funds. I wasn't there to micromanage their lives, just to make sure they had a safe, honest, and welcoming neighborhood again. Karen and her accomplices were officially removed from their positions and banned from holding any HOA-related authority. Moving forward, the legal process was still ongoing, but the message was clear: abuse of power wouldn't be tolerated anymore. The lake cabin, once a place of tension, finally became the quiet getaway I originally intended. I spent that weekend on the porch with a coffee in hand, finally able to enjoy the sound of the water and the breeze in the trees. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: power in the wrong hands can turn a peaceful place into a battleground. But with the truth on your side and a calm head, even the loudest voices eventually get quiet, especially when they realize the person they tried to push out was the one holding all the keys.